Shabbat Shalom Mishpachah, and welcome to Hebrew Bible Secrets with your host, Rabbi Beaton. We are reading today from the book of Acts, starting at chapter 21. Acts, chapter 21, verse 1. 1. And it came to pass that after we tore ourselves from them and had set sail, we came with a straight course to Kos, and the day following to Rhodes, and from there to Patara. 2. And finding a ship sailing over to Phoenicia, we went aboard and set forth. 3. Now when we had discovered Cyprus, we left it on the left hand, and sailed into Syria, and landed at Tyre, for there the ship was to unload the cargo. 4. And finding disciples, we stayed there 7 days, who said to Paulus, through the Ruach set apart spirit, that he should not go up to Jerusalem. 5. And when we had accomplished those days, we departed and went our way. And they all brought us on our way, with wives and children, till we were out of the city. And we kneeled down on the shore and petitioned. 6. And when we had taken our leave one of another, we took ship, and they returned home again. 7. And when we had finished our course from Tyre, we came to Ptolemais, and saluted the brothers, and abode with them one day. 8. And the next day, we that were of Paulus's company departed, and came to Caesarea, and we entered into the house of Philip, the proclaimer, who was one of the 7, and stayed with him. 9. And the same man had 4 daughters, virgins, which did prophesy. 10. And as we stayed there many days, there came down from Yehuda a certain prophet, named Agabus. 11. And when he had come to us, he took Paulus's girdle, and bound his hands and feet, and said, Thus said the Ruach HaKadosh, set apart spirit, so shall the Yehudim at Jerusalem bind the man that owns this girdle, and shall hand him into the hands of the Gentiles. 12. And when we heard these things, both we and they of that place asked him not to go up to Jerusalem. 13. Then Paulus answered, What are you doing? You weep and break my heart, for I am ready not only to be imprisoned, but also to die at Jerusalem for the name of the Master Yahushua. 14. And when he would not be persuaded, we ceased, saying, The will of Yahweh be done. 15. And after those days we took up our carriages, and went up to Jerusalem. 16. There went with us also certain of the Yashali disciples of Caesarea, and brought with them one Nason of Cyprus, a Yashali disciple of age, with whom we should lodge. 17. And when we were come to Jerusalem, the brothers received us gladly. 18. And the day following, Paulus went in with us to Yaakov, and all the elders were present. 19. And when he had greeted them, he declared particularly what things Elohim had done among the Gentiles by his ministry. 20. And when they heard it, they esteemed Yahweh, and said to him, You see, brother, how many tens of thousands of Yehudim there are which believe, and they are all zealous for the Torah. 21. And they are informed of you, that you teach all the Yehudim which are among the Gentiles to forsake Moshe, Musa, Moses, Torah, saying that they should not circumcise their children, neither to walk after halakha. 22. What is it therefore? What then should we do? For they will hear that you have come. 23. Do therefore this, that we say to you, we have 4 men which have a Nazirite vow on them. 24. Take them and purify yourself with them, and pay their expenses, that they may shave their heads, and all may know that those things that they were informed concerning you are not so, but that you yourself also keep the halakha commandments and obey all the Torah. 25. As concerning the believing nations, we have written a letter, having decreed with immediate effect that they guard themselves, avoiding such things, that they guard from meat sacrificed to idols, and blood, and what has been strangled, and whoring. 26. Then Paulus took the men, and the next day, purifying himself with them, entered into the Abrahamic-Faith temple, to signify the accomplishment of the days of purification. 27. And when the 7 days were almost ended, the Yehudim, which were of Asia Minor, when they saw him in the Abrahamic-Faith temple, stirred up all the people and seized him. 28. Shouting, Men of Israel, help! This is the man that teaches all men everywhere against the people and the Torah and this place, and further brought Greeks also into the Abrahamic-Faith, the temple, inner courts, and has polluted this set-apart place. 29. For they had seen before with him in the city an Ephesian, whom they supposed that Paul had brought into the Abrahamic-Faith temple. 30. And all the city was stirred up, and the people ran together, and they took Paulus, and dragged him out of the Abrahamic-Faith temple courts, and shut the doors. 31. And as they went about to kill him, a report came to the chief captain of the band, that all Yeshurun was in an uproar. 32. Who immediately took soldiers and centurions, and ran down to them. And when they saw the chief captain and the soldiers, they stopped beating Paulus. 33. Then the chief captain came near, and took him, and commanded him to be bound with 2 chains. Who he was, and what he had done. 34. And some cried one thing, and some another, among the multitude. And when he could not know the certainty for the matter, he commanded him to be carried into the barracks. 35. And when he came upon the stairs, he had to be carried up the stairs, because of the violence of the mob. 36. For the multitude of the people followed after, shouting, Away with him! 37. And as Paulus was to be led into the barracks, he said to the chief captain, May I speak to you? Who said, Can you speak in Greek? 38. Are you not the Egyptian who started a rebellion and led out into the wilderness 4,000 men that were assassins? 39. But Paulus said, I am a man which am a Yehudi of Tarsus, a city in Cilicia, a citizen of an important city, and I request to you, allow me to speak to the people. 40. And when he had given him permission, Paulus stood on the stairs and gestured with the hand to the people. And when they had become silent, he spoke to them in the Hebrew language, saying. So that now brings us to the end of Acts chapter 21. So let's go back and have a look at some of the footnotes in Acts chapter 21. So the first footnote we have is in verse 1. And it came to pass that after we tore ourselves from them and had set sail, we came with a straight course to Kos. Okay, so let's have a look at this. So we have here, this is an island by the Aegean Sea. Okay, this is an island by the Aegean Sea. Okay, so we have a continuation. And the day following to Rhodes. So let's have a look at this. To Rhodes. an island off the southwestern coast of Asia Minor, and 11 miles of southwestern Turkey. It held one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, the Colossus of Rhodes, that held a statue of the Greek false Elohim, Helios. The statue stood for 66 years until Rhodes was hit by a massive earthquake in 226 BC, a judgment act of Yahweh. The statue snapped at the knees and fell over on the land, falling to the ground, bowing before Yahweh. Yahweh had also made Dagon, the statue of the false god of the Philistines, to bow before him the same way in 1 Samuel 5 and 3. Although Ptolemy III offered to rebuild the statue, but the oracle of Delphi were afraid to rebuild the statue, and it remains to this day. So we have another continuation, and from there to Patara. Okay, so let's have a look at this. So we have here a city in Lycia. It is not far from the sites of Latun and Xanthos, and a day trip from Korkan in Turkey. Alexander the Great used this place for his base. This place was an important judicial seat for the Roman governor. For those who may wish to know, Patra was the birthplace of Saint Nicholas, born during 260 to 280 CE, Bishop of Myra, and the future Santa Claus, Father Christmas, and wrong teaching of the West that has no existence in the faith of the apostles and disciples of Yahushua. Okay, so let's go to the next footnote, which is in verse 5. And when we had accomplished those days, we departed and went our way, and they all brought us on our way with wives and children till we were out of the city, and we kneeled down. Okay, let's have a look at this, kneel down. So notice the mode of prayer, kneeling down, as was practiced by our forefathers. See footnotes Acts 20:36. Okay, so let's go to the next footnote, which is in verse 8. And the next day we that were of Paulus's company departed and came to Caesarea, and we entered into the Beth, the house of Philip the proclaimer. Okay, let's have a look at this, the proclaimer. So we have here, evangelist is a modern term, not one from the 1st century. The proclaimer's job was to proclaim certain truths of Torah fulfillment, and for people to turn away from sin, meaning repent and obey Torah. The term evangelist is one designed by the Roman Catholic Church around the 4th century CE, as Eusebius talks about this. The term correctly should be a proclaimer or a herald, such as used in the line with the Hebrew Tanakh, Isaiah 52 and 7. Okay, so let's have a look at Isaiah 52 and 7. So Isaiah 52 and 7, and it reads, How beautiful upon the mountains are the feet of him that brings good tidings, that proclaims Shalom, that brings good tidings of good, that proclaims rescue, that says to Sion, your king reigns. Okay? So let's go to the next footnote, which is in verse 10. And as we stayed there many days, there came down from Yehuda a certain prophet named Agabus. So let's have a look at this. So note, a male prophet came from Jerusalem, even though there were prophetesses in the assemblies, as Yahweh never broke the headship of man over woman. Okay? So note, a male prophet came from Jerusalem, even though there were prophetesses in the assemblies, as Yahweh never broke the headship of man over woman. Okay, so let's go to the next footnote, which is in verse 11. And when he had come to us, he took Paulus's girdle and bound his own hands and feet and said, Thus said the Ruach HaKadosh, set apart spirit, so shall the Yehudim at Jerusalem bind the man that owns this girdle, and shall hand him into the hands of the Gentiles. So let's have a look at this, hand him into the hands of the Gentiles. So Gentiles were a designation for heathen people, and no believer in his right mind would call himself Gentile, as many call themselves freely in churches, though wrong and an oxymoron. Okay, so let's go to the next footnote, which is in verse 16. There went with us also certain of the Yashvali disciples of Caesarea, and brought with them one Nason of Cyprus, a Yashvali disciple of age. So let's have a look at this, of age. So he was a mature disciple. Okay, so of age, meaning he was a mature disciple. Okay, so let's go to the next footnote, which is in verse 20. And when they heard it, they esteemed Yahweh, and said to him, You see, brother, how many tens of thousands of Yehudim. Okay, let's have a look at this, tens of thousands. So we have here the Greek word myriadis is for tens of thousands. In the Hebrew, it is revava. So let's go to the next footnote, which is a continuation. Of the Yehudim there are which believe, and they are all zealous, for the Torah. So let's have a look at this. They are all zealous for the Torah. So many Hebrews have never forsaken Yahweh's Torah, unlike the Christian church, which was and is lawless from its inception, through the likes of Marcion, who was later called a heretic. Now they follow Marcion type Christianity. Okay, so many Hebrews have never forsaken Yahweh's Torah, unlike the Christian church, which was and is lawless from its inception, through the likes of Marcion, who was later called a heretic. Now they follow Marcion's type Christianity. Okay, so let's go to the next footnote, which is in verse 21. And they are informed of you, that you teach all the Yehudim, which are among the Gentiles, to forsake Moshe, Musa, Moses' Torah, saying that they should not circumcise their children, neither to walk after the halakha. So let's have a look at this, halakha. So customs established by the Rabbim from the Torah. Okay, customs established by the Rabbim from the Torah. Okay, so let's go to the next footnote, which is in verse 25. As concerning the believing nations, so let's have a look at this. So we have here those qualified to be a ger toshav, to become into full ger zadik later, when they understand. See footnotes Acts 10:22 and Acts 15:5. Many Bibles get this translation wrong by adding the word, only that these words do not exist in the Greek text. Okay, these words do not exist in the Greek text. Okay, let's go to the next footnote, which is a continuation. As concerning the believing nations, we have written a letter, having decreed with immediate effect that they guard themselves, avoiding such things, and that they guard from meat sacrificed to idols, and blood, and what has been strangled, and whoring. So let's have a look at this, and whoring. So we have here, so these 4 precepts were taken from the Torah to allow the Gentiles to fellowship with the Yahudim and allow them to slowly but surely keep all the commandments. Okay? So let's read that again. So these 4 precepts were taken from the Torah to allow the Gentiles to fellowship with the Yahudim and allow them to slowly but surely keep all the commandments. Okay? So let's go to the next footnote, which is in verse 26. Then Paulus took the men, and the next day, purifying himself with them, entered into the Abrahamic-Faith, the temple, to signify the accomplishment of the days of purification. So let's have a look at this, purification. So one aspect of this is the red heifer sacrifice, mentioned in Numbers 19 and 9. He would have to remove ritual purity, else he could not go attend the set-apart place. Now Christians who are being cheated and lied to need to explain why did Yahushua not remove these laws. Salvation and rescue is only in the Torah, through the covenants which Yahushua came to ratify. Okay? So let's have a look at Numbers 19 and 9. So Numbers 19 and 9, and it reads, And a man that is clean shall gather up the ashes of the heifer, and lay them up outside the camp in a clean place, and it shall be kept for the congregation of the children of Israel, for a ma'im of menstruation, separation. It is for impurity. Okay, so we have a footnote for impurity. So the Hebrew word chatat here refers to impurity. Okay, the Hebrew word chatat here refers to impurity. Okay, so let's go to the next footnote, which is in verse 28. Shouting, Men of Israel, help! This is the man that teaches all men everywhere against the people and the Torah and this place, and further brought Greeks into the Abrahamic-Faith temple, inner courts. Okay, so let's have a look at this, inner courts. So in 58 CE, a Gentile student of Paulus entered and violated the restriction set on the Gentiles not to go beyond the area of the Gentiles. This happened because Paulus's teachings that were misunderstood found in his letter to the Ephesians in Ephesians 2:14-15, where he taught the middle wall of partition is no longer in effect, that the commandments are abolished. This caused an uproar in Jerusalem. His teaching perhaps influenced Trophimus to do this inaccurately applied. This was also prophesied in Ezekiel 44:7, that a Gentile would enter and defile the precinct. This is another reason why one needs to be careful to interpret Paul's letters. The Israelites were very careful to prevent any Gentile going beyond the protective fence they had erected around the second temple, with a warning inscription declaring death to all the Gentiles who dared to do so, while clearly Trophimus was one who did not care nor think based on the faulty understanding of Paulus. This is what happens when you ignorantly violate Torah. The end result is still death. Note also that Paulus never defends the fact that Trophimus did not go into the temple. Okay, so let's have a look at Ephesians 2:14 to 15. Okay. So Ephesians 2, I'm going to start at 14. For he is our Shalom, who has made both one, and has broken down the middle wall of partition between us. And 15 reads, having abolished in his flesh the enmity, even the Torah of commandments, contained in ordinances, for to make in himself of two one new man, so making shalom. Okay, so we have a footnote in verse 14, or we have two. So the wall of partition, so let's have a look at this. So wall in the temple that was separating the Gentiles, that was taken down. Okay, so we have another footnote, between us. So let's have a look at this. So this was the teaching of Paulus that caused Trophimus to be accused of crossing that region, and for that Paulus was almost going to be killed by the Jews in Jerusalem, because the penalty for crossing the area of the Gentiles was death. So look at Acts 21 and 29. This was clearly marked in the temple, but this theology caused Trophimus to do just what was forbidden. He was an uncircumcised Gentile, spoken about in Ezekiel 44 and 7 prophecy, thanks to Paulus helping to fulfill it. Paulus' intent was not that you now allow Gentiles to walk past that area. He was speaking in spiritual terms, but Trophimus applied it in physical. An easy mistake, but this could cause someone's death, so be aware. Okay, so we have a footnote in verse 15, having abolished in his flesh the enmity. Okay, let's have a look at this. So we have here many commentators such as Luther and Gill have suggested that the Torah of Musa was abrogated in its entirety because of the Pauline statements in Ephesians 2:14 and 15 and Colossians 2:14. Gill said that Paulus was speaking about the law at Mount Sinai. Gill goes on to say that the word Sinai in Hebrew means hatred, indicating Paulus was involved in wordplay with the synonym in Greek. Gill moves on to suggest that from Sinai we received hatred or enmity to the nations of the world, which the Messiah abolished. Some other commentators come to similar faulty conclusions. This means they are all part of the crowd who are adding to the words of the Torah in Deuteronomy 4 and 2, and can equally be judged as guilty of Torah violations. Using such statements, it is very easy to make incorrect theologies. The word abolish must be understood in the correct context. Okay, so we have one more footnote here. So even the Torah of commandments. So let's have a look at this. So we have here, this is how Christendom has used Pauline letters to justify lawless living. The Messiah never did away with the Torah, else why would he advise the rich young ruler to obey the commandments in Matthew 19:16 and 17. Okay, so we have one last footnote to continuation. So making shalom. So it reads, the Torah is freedom and open space, gives us life and reveals our Messiah. So the Torah is not against us, but for us. What is against us is sin, and this is compounded by human laws that are against us. If we obey Torah, then that automatically makes us whole in the Abba and keeps us from transgressing with the binding effect to the covenant. Okay? So let's have a quick look at Colossians 2:14. So Colossians 2:14, and it reads, blotting out the charge sheet of ordinances that were against us, which was contrary to us, and took it out of the way, nailing it to his execution stake. Okay? So blotting out the charge sheet of ordinances that were against us, which was contrary to us, and took it out of the way, nailing it to his execution stake. So let's go to the next footnote, which is in verse 38. Are you not the Egyptian? So let's have a look at this. So Paul was ethnically a black African. Look at Psalm 7 of Benjamin the Cushite. They look like Ethiopians. Okay, so let's go to the next footnote, which is in verse 40. And when he had given him permission, Paul stood on the stairs and gestured with the hand to the people. And when they had become silent, he spoke to them in the Hebrew language, saying, okay, so let's have a look at this, saying. So this was a serious issue and was never resolved by the Jerusalem elders, since they never got a chance to speak to Paulus. Paulus's teachings caused many similar problems wherever he went. He caused confusion and problems. The same was true in Ephesus, Antioch, and other places. He was a Pharisee, and he used a lot of acronyms and Hebraisms, but the locals where he went were a mixture of Hellenists and did not grasp his teachings and misfollowed his letters. Okay, so that now brings us to the end of Acts 21. So I thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you on the other side. This is Rabbi Beaton saying thank you for watching, and Shalom Shalom. Baruch Shem, Kivod, Malkuto, Leolam Va'ed. Benevolent be the name of his esteemed kingdom, forever and ever and ever. Amen.